Well, while Kirti and I had a conversation about this particular conversation on brain health, in my mind, I was trying to wreck through what is it that I can offer this, because I'm obviously in no way an expert in brain health, even though I am a traditional healer. And what Kirti was speaking about, that we oftentimes have different names and different words for the same things, is something that I found quite challenging in my own practice, in my own career, and whilst trying to teach students about the intersections and also the places of departure between Indigenous knowledge systems and then, I guess, biomedical or Euro-American frameworks of understanding. And I often find myself quite annoyed at this term, the cultural understandings or the cultural interventions or the cultural modes, because I often find that biomedicine doesn't consider itself a culture, and it seems like everything else is a culture. And I think I'm not going to go so far, but perhaps thinking of the different cultures of medical knowledge that can impact or that can intervene in brain health is what I'm wanting to be doing for today's session.
And do you want to discuss that a little bit more before I go on to the next speaker?
Oh, sure. Sorry. I thought it was questions and answers. So in thinking about biomedicine as a culture, there's specific, I guess, systems, specific rules, specific frameworks that biomedicine has, just like any other knowledge system or healing modality. And so I generally try to think of it as different cultures and the different ways in which the cultures can speak to each other. I'm finding myself, because of the politics in this country, because of our history, it's almost as if from an Indigenous knowledge, and when I say Indigenous knowledge within a South African context, I'm speaking about South African forms of metaphysics or South African philosophy of reality and the human, and that this is intimately tied with the philosophy of Abantu or the philosophy of people, traditional healers within South Africa, that sees reality as something slightly different than what we're trained in school. And when I'm speaking about metaphysical, I'm speaking about the immaterial and the material constantly entangled with one another. And so interventions for health is the material and the immaterial constantly tangled in one another, and we intervene on both the levels. And so thinking about brain health becomes slightly difficult for a person like me, because when we think of health, we don't think of it as a health of a particular organ or health in a particular kind of way. And even though I'm increasingly getting challenged with thinking through this idea of holistic health, because of lack of a better word, when we speak about holism or holistic health, we're thinking of the immaterial parts of the human and the material parts of the human. And when we're healing one, we're ultimately healing the other. So I was kind of, in preparation, was looking at some of the medicines that we use. And I'm like, how am I going to translate that a particular medicine has its physiological properties that can heal a part of the body? Some of our medicines, yes, can work with certain brain chemistries, the neurotransmitters, etc., but we don't take it as just that. So those very same medicines also have psycho-spiritual connotations. They also work materially and immaterially. And then obviously, like, the challenge of trying to translate that to a practitioner maybe that works only with the physiological uses of medicine. And I say medicine because that's the closest thing, but also the therapies that we use for brain health, for physical health, for spiritual health, for social health, again, have material, physiological benefits, as well as the immaterial, the psycho-spiritual, etc. kind of benefits. And so I feel like even in the way that I'm speaking, I'm already showing some of the tensions that we could have when we're trying to work across different cultures in intervening for brain health.
Thanks, Sinetema. Very, very well said. And yes, I think that may be one of the biggest tensions in, let's say, the field that I come from in terms of biomedical medicine or allopathic medicine, in terms of incorporating psycho-spiritual health. I'm sure if I did a poll of the medical doctors, it's going to be like, no, they cannot actually incorporate. It's going to be interesting to see, actually. Gratia, I'm going to come to you. Gratia Mutabazi is a researcher at Stellenbosch University. I have to read the title, at the Center for the Afterlife of Violence and the Reparative Quest, and also a traditional Rwandan dancer. And her research interests, she includes the lens of cultural song, dance, and performance for healing. Gratia, over to you.
Thanks, Kirsty, and good afternoon once again to everyone. I'll start by introducing myself. I always say I was born in Rwanda just before the war started in 1994. And along with my parents at the time, had to flee like millions of other Rwandans during that time to seek refuge elsewhere. And our journey took us through, at the time, Zaire, now known as Congo, Zambia, Malawi, through Mozambique, and eventually we arrived in South Africa in 1998. And on arrival and during those travels, a lot of the Rwandan refugees who were in camps or who would find themselves in spaces where they could form community look towards cultural dance and song as a means of communing, as a means of coming together, and as something to hold on to in the midst of trauma, in the midst of violent displacement, and a lot of severe loss and pain. And so that history has informed a lot of my own personal questions about where I come from, about the country that I was born in, and to this day, not able to return to. Although some people have one perspective of Rwanda as, fairly progressive and open, there are millions of other Rwandans who contest the current state of affairs, and so use whatever opportunities are available to them to question that, and to question their migration in and out of the country. So when I arrived in South Africa, one of the things that I became a part of was a traditional dance group, which was established by our parents here in exile in Johannesburg, where I live. And it was a means of trying to teach the young children at the time about our culture and our traditions. And so that was one of the primary ways in which I learned my own language of Kinyarwanda. I learned where my parents come from. I had some kind of sense of the country through the songs. So in my research, I write a lot about, weekend afternoons listening to my mother play songs that were traditional folk songs in our kitchens and at home while we're doing the chores. And it would sing about, Rwanda and its thousands of hills, its greenery. And so the visceral image of the land, of the people, of how they live, I grew up and I am attuned through, but through the lens of song and performance. And one of my mentors, Mr. Cyprian Kagorora, who was a prominent artist, composer, and choreographer in Rwanda and was part of the major national ballets before the war in 1994, we had the opportunity to connect with him in Johannesburg as a community, and he was one of the people who taught us how to dance in exile. Prior to this, he had done a similar thing by establishing groups in Kenya, in exile, and now where he currently resides in Australia. So earlier, when Kirti introduced us, she mentioned a project that I was involved in that came out of my research called Dialogues Across Violent Histories, and looking at how Indigenous art plays a role in social cohesions and to respond to questions of repair and healing amongst communities that share histories of violent dispossession and displacement. So it was a very moving project and personal project for me because I used the context of our group. It's called Jihozo in my research. For ethical reasons, I don't mention the name of the group, but here I can because it does have a public profile to an extent. And Jihozo was established by our parents, like I said, and choreographically conceived by Cyprian Kagorora. much like the other groups, Hoza in Kenya and Imanzi in Australia. But what I found quite powerful and impactful about these traditional dance groups is at a very local level, they were responding to questions of how to establish continuity amongst the new generation who still needed to draw on their cultural knowledge to make sense of their own identities in exile and to have something to hold on to, a kind of heritage that they could carry on through their parents and as children. But also within the places of residencies that refugees found themselves, like South Africa, these traditional dance groups also opened up new opportunities for collaboration. So last year in the project, for example, Cyprian was quite crucial in connecting with jazz musicians here in South Africa through the theater and performing arts sector. So we had invited Kituletsi Gwangwa, who is daughter to prominent jazz musician Jonas Gwangwa, and how we had collaborated as a group in various ways with them. There was also Mandla Mlangeni, who is the son of Becky Mlangeni, a prominent struggle icon in South Africa's freedom history, and how his son has almost continued those questions of freedom repair in the post-apartheid dispensation, but through the lens of the sonic and jazz in which he explores. Kituletsi Gwangwa herself as a traditional healer, almost taking on that question from her father and his sonic work, but through her work as an Indigenous healer and practitioner. And then Cyprian, who's worked with these people, and in his context, when he moved to Australia, then connected with the Aboriginal community there, who were themselves also responding to questions of land dispossession and Indigenous knowledge system erasure. And so for me, this question of indigeneity, transnationalism, as well as international transmission of knowledge becomes a really important way of saying, how do we use these knowledge systems to respond to questions of trauma? And how do we use practices of repair? So in the context of my own work, embodied practice such as dance, to tease out these knowledge systems. And as I'm writing, I'm currently wrapping up my master's thesis, but it's been interesting because I'll give an example, like the songs we dance, we were taught them, and initially it's just, some of my research participants, I had narrative interviews that I conducted with them around some of the affects that they associate with the songs. Why are they drawn to particular songs? What is it about the rhythms, the movements? So Rwandan dances, there's a lot of arm stretching and extending your arms in postures of openness, which are quite consistent if you would find in like knowledge systems of yoga. There's a lot of dancing with feet connected to the ground. Also with other similar knowledge systems that promote grounding and understanding the human body as kind of this electromagnetic organism that is connected to the earth, and how important it is for human beings to be grounded in the earth. And so something that is seemingly aesthetically mundane, or people will enjoy from an aesthetic perspective, in my research, I argue, is quite a dialogical practice that is informing and educating the dancers themselves through their bodies, the audience themselves as dialogical participants in watching this, in being drawn into the dance, to reconnect with an ecological understanding of being, an ecological understanding of wholeness. And so, for example, there's a song we dance that I was recently writing about. It's called Ijisasa. One of our participants mentioned it in my research. And Ijisasa is like the sorghum plant, for example. And sorghum is a very important grain in the African context. It's used for like traditional beers, breads, all across Africa, you'll find it. Syrup is as well as used for like sweetness in drinks in the United States, is also quite popular there. But there's a song that we dance and it's paired up. So there's also this idea of relationality and mirroring as dancers face each other. And the song sings about how to care for the plant, those who look after it, get to reap its yield better, things like that. So there's a knowledge system that emerges there around how human beings and their connection to nature and their participation to its preservation also preserves them in turn. So now sorghum might seem like a really mundane thing, but for those who follow the news and like trends, things like kombucha and fermented drinks have become quite the fad. But it's based in some kind of scientific awareness of the importance of gut health and how it affects mood and how it affects brain functioning and how it treats things like anxiety, depression, and things like that. So in traditional Rwandan culture, sorghum beer, for example, is something that is quite prominent in a lot of cultural festivities and coming togethers of families and community celebrations, weddings. And that beer will form an important role. In South Africa, that might be like umqombothi, for example, and people will drink that and be happy. So without an awareness of what that means, somebody who is quite limited in knowledge would be like, no, these are just Africans sitting and drinking beer and being happy, but not recognizing that, once labor has been done, once work has been done in the land amongst the people, there's an understanding of maintaining equilibrium in the body, and that can be facilitated through like fermented drink and something like that. And so in the context of something like brain health, you then start to see how things like song and dance can inform perhaps more biomedically presented ideas like, brain gut axis knowledge, so understanding how your gut health informs your brain health, and how there's an ecological system at play there. So a lot of my work is interested in how to show that these cultural strategies that Indigenous communities have and have always had are really important in helping us make sense of ideas of repair and how we can respond to trauma, especially when we understand trauma as a kind of ecological disruption throughout space and time. So how then can we draw on these knowledge systems that are existing and support their continuity through intergenerational transmission, and also acknowledge their value and social impact at a transnational level in the ways that they connect communities. So a cultural group from Rwanda, such as mine, being able to establish those connections within South Africa, within Australia, and we're all responding to the same historical issues of displacement, of loss, of time. So a lot of my work and the research that we do here at our center is interested in those questions of trauma, is interested in those questions of repair, and that's how my own personal research attempts to make these more visible. And I say that because people think that they don't exist, they've been existing, but I think it requires a special kind of sophistication and literacy to understand how these things work and how then are they preserved in their various communities. So I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Gratia. No, that was wonderful. And I think it was a few years ago, maybe about 10 years ago, where sorghum suddenly became the superfood, and how it was marketed then as a superfood. And, there's nothing wrong with being happy. Like, what about a system that says sitting in joy with your friends is the problem? We are going to go now to neurologist Maritza Caipa Pintado from Peru. And Maritza is a neurologist and an Atlantic Fellow and also part of the Latin American group that focuses on dementia. And her work looks at cognition and dementia in vulnerable communities across Peru. Maritza?
Good morning, good night, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. Thank you so much for the invitation. I will need the help of I will share with you a small presentation, please.
Yeah, you can share the slides.
Okay, thank you so much. Because just to tell you about my country is a lot of words that I will use some pictures from my colleague Alex Kornhuber to explain about a little bit about the challenges and opportunities in Peru. like we have with indigenous communities. Yes, my work is very focused on in rural communities in Peru, and Peru is known as one of the most diverse countries in the region here in Latin America. As you see here, we have a diverse geographic, which includes the coast region, the Andes region, the jungle region, and also we have more than 47 languages, different kinds of 47 languages. Just in the Amazonian region, we have 43. In the Andes, we have 4, but it's more spoken than the Aymara and Quechua language. In the Spanish is the official language in Peru. Because this kind of diversity, we have a lot of diversity in terms of environmental, nutritional and culinary diversity, cultural diversity, social diversity, ethnic diversity. All of these could be barriers, of course. Because all of these are influencing the economic development of people, life opportunities of people, health and well-being of our communities. It could be a challenge, or yes, of course, because just look these pictures of these different people living in this diverse country is amazing. I love this, but also it could be a big barrier for us. Let me follow. Okay. This is the environment that our communities are living. The first picture is in the coast regions with people living together without water, without access, without electricity. The majority of them are people who were living in the jungle or in the Andes or in rural communities in the coast and trying to move and immigrating to Lima, capital, just to look for new opportunities and just to look for access to education and health. And in the middle of these 3 pictures is a picture of the Andes, how people are living. It is completely different. It's cold sometimes, raining, but again, they have a lot of limitations too. And the final picture is in the jungle. They don't have roads, they don't have access. They are just transportation using the river and just walking sometimes. So they are living in that way, looking for water, looking for electricity, and they are living with a lot of limitations. So to live in the coast could be, in terms of health, they have barriers in terms of accessibility, availability. They don't have, for example, a close primary care center to take care of them. They have no access. They have no roads, escalators, for example. They are living in the capital, for example, this woman is living in the capital, very close to everything, but with a complete limitation for everything, without education, without health, without electricity, without water. This is sadness that we have Peruvians living in that way, just close to us. In the same way, people living in the Andes, obviously they are doing everything there, many kind of activities to survive, but again, they don't have access to health in terms of availability, acceptability, or adequacy. The major barrier for them could be geographical, yes, because they don't have roads, cultural, because it's a completely different culture. They are more close, they are not trusting to politicians, they are not trusting to other kind of medicine, they are not trusting other kind of people, because their culture is completely different compared with the jungle or the coast of the country. Also in terms of languages. For example, my maternal language was, I grew up speaking just Spanish, but my grandmother was speaking Aymara and other kind of languages. But because we, like for decades, many Peruvians were like almost embarrassed to embrace our culture, our languages, these kind of languages were missing across the years. So I couldn't learn how to speak Aymara, which is embarrassed for me now. But the majority of the country is just speaking Spanish. But what happened in rural communities, or what happened in rural communities in the Andes, Many of them are speaking just Quechua or Aymara, which is a big barrier. How we could communicate each other, how I could care, I could provide health care of people who is not understand me, how I can work with them. This is a big, big barrier for us. And also people living in the jungle, because they are living in the jungle, they have a lot of knowledge about herbs, leaves, and a lot of other kind of medicine, how take care of their self, about using plants, for example, to take care of children. But this is not, this is a knowledge that it is missing more and more in the country, because nobody is like taking care and paying attention to that knowledge that they are still embracing. So they are just moving across the river with a poor accessibility to healthcare. They don't have like awareness about how take care of their health, and also they have a lot of barriers because they are separated in small communities living in the border of the river. This is a big challenge for us. And more than that, many of our older adults are living with a lot of disabilities, hearing disabilities, visual impairments, physical disabilities, also malnutrition, poor tissues. Well, and they are very focused on that impairments and trying to solve these impairments. So when I am visiting these rural communities and trying to talk about the brain, could be the brain could make it, brain health may not be considered as a priority for them, because they have another kind of issues that they have to solve day by day. But it is also important for us to start to talk about the brain, but embracing all this diversity, and also embracing all these issues that they have already in their lives. So this is Peru as, and the diversity of Peru as barriers. What about Peru? What about if we could live and have our diversity as an opportunity? Why not? For example, I was telling you that we have 3 different regions, geographical regions. And also we have people who has another kind of language. But the majority of them for now, for example, children or people who is young people there are bilingual. Why not? We could say that many times when I am visiting this kind of communities and talking with this kind of children, I am saying, you speak Spanish? Yes. You speak Aymara? Yes. Or you speak Quechua or another language? Yes. I have to, I need to tell them that they are bilingual, for example, and they are taking care of their brains because the reason that they are bilingual, or they are singing songs that for their cultures with their own languages. And this is very special. So we need to recognize this diversity as an opportunity. We need to work a lot with these kind of communities, with children and young people, to embrace this diversity. We need to, and other Peruvians like me, we need to know more deeply our culture. And also we need to work to empower people like this to recognize this diversity. And also, I never heard before something like that, like reparation of culture, reparation of languages or something like this. But we need to start that work in these communities. Recognizing this diversity and this powerful diversity, maybe we could build a new way to create access to these communities and also to avoid and jump over the barriers that I was telling you before. In this case, the one good thing that we still have is that we have a lot of intergenerational exchange between older adults and young people, like passing knowledge, passing, for example, how they could create these beautiful dresses. They are still weaving and making this kind of beautiful dresses for decades. We should work in that way just to preserve that culture. Many children are embarrassed now to speak, for example, Quechua or Aymara, the native languages. But we have to tell them that no, this is a good thing. This is almost I don't say privilege. This is a privilege to still talk the native language of their culture. Please don't feel embarrassed about that. But we need to take care of that in these communities. Also, in these kind of communities, everything is developing around songs, music, dances. When they are cultivating the land, they are dancing, they are singing every time. When they have to move to one community to another community, also they are dancing. When they are celebrating something, they are dancing. And we should take care of that. We can't avoid this kind of knowledge and just missing. For example, people who is living in this community, these kind of communities are still functional. I was surprised that a woman of more than 82 years old, she's still walking. Doesn't matter if she is not able to see correctly. She has a vision impairment, but she is still moving around their house. Or other people saying, Manuel, she's still taking care of their animals and his family. He is a respectful respect men in that community. So this kind of knowledge or culture, we could embrace that kind of life. So yeah, this is what I am doing my work in Peru. I am happy to know more deeply now how people are living in Peru compared with people in rural communities are living in Peru compared with people who is living in big cities, right? So this is important to have in mind how we are able to use this diversity in a good way. For example, people who is living in these kind of communities are still connected with the land, with the nature, right? And we don't, and people who is living in cities, we are looking for nature and trying to be in calm, but they are still living in this kind of nature that provides them living with a lot of connections in terms of spirituality, with culture, with the land. Here in Peru, they respect a lot of the land. We name them the Pachamama, which is the mother. The land is the mother, which means the land is the mother of everything. This is the Pachamama for us. So we need to, as a Peruvian, I could say that we need to understand better what about this diversity, how we could embrace this diversity, how we could empower people living in rural communities to embrace more their cultures or our culture, and how we could work in reparation of the culture, and finally, how we could recognize and preserve this diversity in Peru. yeah, I will stop here. So I, doing my work as a neurology, working in these rural communities, many times I was feeling privileged to be with them. Many times I was feeling embarrassed because I was not able to talk them, for example, in Quechua, when I was trying to provide health to them. I was feeling also many times frustrated because how to provide healthcare access to them could be a challenging thing, taking in mind this kind of diverse factors, which make us sometimes different, but we are in the same country. It is incredible how people living in the same country could be very different in different regions. But unfortunately, the how rules and system of health are built in my country are still made without considering this amazing diversity that we have. So this is I hope in the future we could really embrace our diversity and rewrite all the rules, all the norms, and all the system of health, taking in mind this kind of people to provide better healthcare of them.
Thank you, Maritza, for your insights and a very challenging and I'm sure rewarding work in terms of how do we actually embrace diversity. But yes, lots of challenges. And perhaps our next speaker will help us with some of that. Professor Vinod Diwan is from the Karolinska Institute, working in the field of global health and has started including yogic knowledge into some of the healthcare initiatives. Vinod, over to you. Vinod, you're on mute.
Cool. Okay, so just let me just tell about what I'm going to focus. Yeah, I'm a medical doctor, so I'm an allopathic or biomedical. I'm also a professor in public health. So I'm actually coming from the allopathic medicine. But I'm going to focus on how allopathic medicine can be complementary, or how the traditional medicine, for example, the Indian system of medicine, can be complementary to the biomedical system. The Indian system of medicine, which is called Ayurveda, which includes yoga and meditation, it's very old. It's nearly 5,000 years. And it has developed over the year with experience. And many people think that yoga and meditation and Ayurveda are hocus pocus. Like they think that, well, it's no system in there. Actually, I'm working on artificial intelligence to make the diagnosis based on Ayurveda now. And I find that it's a system which is very systematic. It follows the diagnosis and treatment in the almost as similar way as we follow in the biomedicine. But following the questions which Kirti had given, I'm going to tell about how to work with the different system and what are the problems. First of all, biomedicine, and for example, yoga or Ayurveda, these are two different systems, you could say. The first problem is that there is a lot of prestige in medicine, whether it's Ayurveda or is it biomedicine. Each one thinks that they can do everything, which I think is not the case. Neither the biomedicine can solve all the problems, nor Ayurveda can do it. At the same time, biomedicine, as it has developed in last 100, 150 years, it has become a bit hierarchical in the sense that it considers itself the best. And the practitioner of allopathic medicine, they have that superiority that every other system is subordinate, they are not good enough. I think that is the biggest problem in working together. And also there is prestige, So each system is saying that, well, we are the best, and so then nobody wants to come together. And I think if one would like to work, one has to have the understanding of the other system. And the understanding when you go to is that biomedicine is a epidemiology based, it's a system where randomized controlled trials create the evidence. And that we find out what is the common effect, Say if you do a randomized controlled trial for certain drug, or if you do a randomized controlled trials or controlled trials in molecular medicine and so on and so forth, you find something common, which is useful. But that common is never 100%, It could be common to 60, 70, 80%. That's 20% is still left where we cannot find. Say if you say drug, it affects certain disease, but it might not cure everyone, It might cure 80% people, but not other persons. Whereas Ayurveda and yoga, they are a practice-based system. That means their practice has led to practitioners to understand more about the system. So this experience is given. So the evaluation of Ayurveda is based on the practitioner's knowledge, experience. And it has come since many, many years, as I said, 5,000 years. So while biomedicine is a quick effect, because if you take a drug and you feel better immediately, or whereas Ayurveda, yoga, they have a slow effect. And but at the same time, while biomedicine may not be that sustainable, the health, especially under Ayurveda and yoga, is more sustainable. The other, I think, difference between the Ayurveda and biomedicine is that the biomedicine look at one person at a time, one system at a time, one disease at a time, one cell at a time. Whereas the Ayurveda is more holistic. It looks at not only the person's, all the systems, the surrounding, the family, and maybe the society also. So I think with this holistic effect, of course it's slow, but it may have more sustainable, and that it can last for a longer period of time. Now, there is a proverb, I think is right in this at this seminar, they say in African proverb, I don't know how true it is, but they said if you need to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go long, you have to go together. And I think this is what is the important part of the knowledge systems, which are, for example, not only indigenous, but different. That if one would like to have a sustainable knowledge, it is better that you go together also. And in that respect, I have been working with yoga particularly and meditation, using the more biomedical approach to its evaluation. Randomized controlled trials for evaluating the effect of yoga. And we have done several studies, and from the literature, it is very clear that yoga has a complementary function in many diseases: hypertension, post-myocardial infarction, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, anxiety, depression, and maybe other long-term diseases. For example, now we are working on post-COVID and also the well-being of elderly using yoga. And all this, what we are doing is that we would like to create a evidence which can be accepted also by other systems, for example, in this case, biomedicine. Because the biomedicine is very different, biomedicine is called kind of a economic, it's a technological rupture, where it developed from the knowledge which was traditional, but it found a different way also to diagnose the disease and treat it. So going back to the reason, the problems between biomedicine and the indigenous or traditional medicine is that one need to bring down the prestige a bit and not work as a hierarchy. So I think both kind of system has to learn from each other. The second question which Kirti had given, that how to facilitate the understanding between the two kind of system. And I would say that I've been working actively on this. And one way, which I think what I've said earlier, that how evidence is seen by biomedicine compared to, for example, Ayurveda, is very different. Now we need to bring the people who are practicing these two medicines together to find how we can evaluate the biomedicine for the holistic purpose and Ayurveda for the disease also. And I think that is a project which I have started using Delphi technique that includes the biomedical researcher and the traditional Ayurvedic researchers. And the last question, which I had which Kirti had given, is that what can be done when the two systems are contradictory. They are contradictory in many points. I think that has to be accepted. It's not that biomedicine is exactly as the traditional Indian system. They have different ways, diagnosis, treatment also. They have certain common basis, but there are also differences there are contradictions. And but I would say that what we should continue to work on is the patient welfare as a center. Because if the patient, and in my research we have shown also, say if you have an anxiety patient, the anxiety patient requires certain kind of biomedicine, chemicals, But if you combine it, mindful meditation or yoga with it, you can reduce the dose of the biochemical. And that means that the side effects will be less. At the same time, the patient has own control. Patient can control itself also, because biomedicine is health worker dependent, because you have to go to a health worker, a doctor, a nurse, or somebody. Whereas the traditional medicines, especially, for example, yoga, it's for the individual to practice. And I think the involvement of the patient is very important, because after all, whose body is it, or whose soul it is? It is the patient, And if the patient knows how he can or she can take care of himself, then I think it's better for the society as such. So I would stop there, and I would say that it has to be both complementary medicine, but also integrative medicine, that you can integrate the traditional knowledge to the more modern knowledge which we have now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vinod, for your insights. I think it's very interesting in terms of working across these two systems and how do we actually work together. So I'm going to open it for questions, or if any of the panelists want to come in at this point again. Sinetem, I don't know if you have anything to say, given everybody's responses, or if anybody does have a question, to unmute yourself. Samu, if you want to ask your question, to unmute yourself and feel free to ask the question. Victor, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for this really interesting and stimulating discussion. And thank you for those different perspectives. And so maybe just as a bit of a background, so I'm an audiologist by profession, and what we are also seeing is these interactions in between cognition as well as state of mind related to hearing loss. So how hearing loss can exacerbate many of these cognitive challenges and difficulties. And so thank you for highlighting those aspects. I guess my question was about, thank you for the last presentation about the Ayurvedic medicines and yoga aspects. And I was just wondering about the use of the absolutisms that was maybe sort of discussing and this would apply to allopathic as well as to other forms of medicine, the definites, the wills, the do's, those kinds of absolutisms. And I think we might need to be careful about using those, because in all forms of interventions, absolutisms might be challenging to use across the board. But thank you very much for that opportunity.
Thanks, Victor. Does anybody want to respond? Vinod or Sinetemba?
Thank you for that comment, Victor. And I mean, I don't know if it is my place to respond, but just as Victor is speaking about absolutisms, would like to share perhaps a bit of the reasoning around the use of traditional medicine. And again, I say traditional medicine, I hate that word, but just because, there's a lot of different kinds of people here. I will use that. So I guess I didn't want to go into great detail about the African view of reality or the African metaphysical view of reality, as well as of the human. However, just briefly, we have something that we call the African cosmology, which sees reality as immaterial, as I said before, meaning that there's a lot of beings, metaphysical beings, the creator, the different kinds of ancestors, and then the human, and then the environment and the ecology. Similarly, within the human, we see there being a spirit, soul, and a body, which is a reflection really of the cosmology. And why I feel it quite important to say this is then traditional medicine works on, I want to say individualistic, but I don't know that that's the right word, but a tailor-made intervention for a particular person in relation to the beings on their cosmology, in relation to the different elements in their own spirit and their own soul. And so I think an absolutism within this knowledge system would be rather difficult, because then the practitioner or the healer would have to understand the spiritual makeup of the person, the physiological makeup of the person. We even say in isiZulu kukhona imithi engadliwa yizonke ibongo, meaning that there's certain medicines and that not all surnames can partake in. And when we speak about surnames, the metaphor is around a person's blood. So the makeup of the blood of a person needs to be taken into consideration before prescribing any particular kind of medication. And so in this case, I think it would be quite difficult to say, if I give person A medication B, or if I prescribed therapy C to person D, if this person is gonna be okay. But rather it's a kind of a trial and error to see the kind of medication or the kind of therapy that agrees with the ancestral makeup, the spiritual makeup, the physiological makeup of the person, but also taking into consideration that it's not a one size fits all, and you'd need to work quite closely with that person's makeup on all levels of being.
Thanks, Sinetema. Very, very, very good. Sam, I'm going to go to you, then Gratia, I'll come to you, and then Marge. Is that fine? Oh, Gratia, did you want to respond to this in particular?
Yeah, no, it was just to add on to what Sinetemba mentioned, because I think it's an important point, is particularly within like the African conception of being, to understand how personhood and the philosophies around that inform it. So I was following this conversation about absolutisms, for example. When you think of a concept of like Ubuntu and the way in which scholars such as Prof. Mahobera Mose define it, Ubuntu is not a ness. It's not an ism. So if people understand it as like humanism, it's not that, it's a humanness. So it's a logic, the term he uses, that is reomodic, meaning it's a logic for the preservation of being as wholeness. So whenever we understand the person, it's what kind of strategies, what kind of interventions are we introducing to a person, to a community, that move towards the preservation of being as wholeness. So that kind of notion of equilibrium, maintaining wholeness, is what interventions of repair should be centered around. And I think this also makes us think quite critically around indigeneity as something that is located in space and in particular places. So what Sinentemba was mentioning about certain medicines that a certain group of people can't eat, I think there's also there something very instructive about sustainability and the way in which we use the natural environment and draw from the places that we live and emerge from, as opposed to like getting medicines that are not from a particular region and the environmental consequences of such. So a lot of these philosophies around beings and around wholeness and around ecosystem and sustainability are actually very sophisticated in how to repair people within a community and within a certain ecological framework. And so I think when we think of intervention, we need to think of it as these kind of repair strategies that are speaking towards that idea of wholeness and the preservation of wholeness of being.
Thanks, Gratia. And Samuel?
Yeah, it's very, very interesting to think about medicine and medical practice and health within this particular context. Understanding that whether one calls it biomedical science or whatever, the whole enterprise lost the people a long time ago. One cannot separate that from the conquest of colonialism and religion and all of that. And all of those lost the people a long time ago. And the struggle has been always to use force and more force, trying to get people into churches, or use manipulation, trying to get people into hospitals. Right? And it's no surprise that people are going to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist who is trained in compartmentalized medicine and health practice on a Monday, and then they go elsewhere on a Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. Right? So there's a lot of time and money and wastage of resources in trying to get people to pursue a system that lost them a long time ago, that is using force, right, intellectual and also monetary force to get people into healthcare systems that don't work for the people. So there's a contest here between indigeneity in its own context and colonialism and all these spaces, whether it's education, religion, and health practices, specific contestations of the disconnect that people experience with these systems that are not relating to how people experience themselves. So hence my question around if I queered brain health itself as a concept, one then has to ask the question, in what framework is that, right? Is that part of the ecological understanding of health? Or it's also another experience where I'm now separating, I'm compartmentalizing health in particular body element, right? So the brain is just like a leg, right? So now I become a podiatrist because I'm a specialist for the leg. I become a specialist for an ear, and then what do we do with the rest of the person?
Thanks, Nsamo. Completely agree. And maybe we'll take Marge's question also, but Maritza, I don't know if you want to comment on that also from a neurology point of view, perhaps. But it is compartmentalized. There's a definitive problem with that in terms of the way it's conceptualized, because it belongs to this allopathic biomedical system. But as soon as you, for me personally, as soon as you start, and I think Maritza's talk also, spoke to it. As soon as you start looking at brain health, you realize, firstly, we're not going to be able to do this alone, which is why we have to start incorporating lots of different knowledge systems, but also the brain is part of the body. Like there's just no separating, and, no separating a brain, mind, spirit, all of it in terms of how we're going to have to approach that. So very exciting, very challenging, but completely agree, even in terms of impact of colonization, which is why we have to have these conversations. Marge, I'm going to ask you to ask your question, and Maritza, I'll give you the opportunity to respond to that as well. Marge, you want to go ahead?
Great, thanks, Katie, and thanks to everybody. Such an interesting conversation. Gracia, you mentioned trauma as an ecological disruption. And I think that is such an important aspect. What I would like you to perhaps elaborate on is the implications of that in terms of healing. So how do we heal in community? within particularly an African context? And also, how do we really balance the wholeness aspect of healing with people with trauma identification or trauma over identification? So how do we balance this trauma over identification with very much holding a space and understanding the healing of that trauma or the integration of that trauma in a oneness way or from a wholeness perspective?
Ratia?
Thank you for your question. I think it's one that I myself am grappling with, and I think about it together along with my participants. So I'll speak from the perspective of like my own research, particularly in like Rwandan traditional dance, for example, and the different ways in which we can read trauma. So I'd also encourage everyone to share and continually discussing like how that manifests in their own different spheres of influence and their own knowledge, expertise. But for example, I think with something like war that happened in Rwanda, one of the ways in which, at least for me, trauma then emerges is in silences, as in, and also in alienation. So in Kinyarwanda, we have a word called irungu, and irungu speaks about loneliness and alienation, but of the person from those systems of community and connectedness. So when we dance, for example, another word we have in Kinyarwanda is called gutarama, which is a way of describing coming together in celebration. So through dance, through community. And already gutarama is something that responds to irungu. So coming together is something that responds to the experience of alienation. So when you dance with somebody, there is an immediate implication through the body. And so I think that connectedness already responds to alienation as an experience of trauma in itself. And then also silence. So at a quite literal level, dancing and the sonic, filling up those silences and those gaps. But what I found in my work is there's a recursivity. So something like a cultural sonic archive, or let's say like folk music that people constantly return to and engage with and reflect on, is important because similar to how the brain functions in like patterns and repetitions and movements, vibrations, those kinds of things. So there's something that comes as a healing structure that emerges from repetition. Even if you think cognitively of how the brain, part of its healing is creating new pathways, but it's establishing that from how it makes sense of those disruptions before. So I think that's one way I've started thinking about it. And when I say ecological disruption, it's also to speak to what Nsamu mentioned earlier about violence, and how violence as a trauma creates those interruptions, creates those ruptures between generations, between parents and children. So when we're addressing these physiological and biochemical responses of violence and trauma, really we're also saying like, how do we stop violence? How does repair become something that prevents violence, prevents these kinds of things? Because we can't only speak about healing when we're not speaking about what is creating these gaps, what is creating these silences, and what is preventing people from speaking, from coming together again. Because I do actually believe that once those spaces are there, and which is what we witnessed last year with the project that I was running, people are able to hold each other. People are able to hold each other, and that work emerges amongst people themselves. So I think there's also something that is humbling about thinking of intervention as the thing that comes from experts, whereas it's really strategies that allow people to understand that they can do that work and that they can be held by others as well. And so I think dance as a modality is something that demonstrates this really even at a pedagogical level. And so it's something that I'm exploring as well in my work. Yeah.
Thanks, Gratia. So Sinetemba, I'll come to you, then Vinod, and then Maritza. Sinetemba?
Thank you so much, Kirti, and I'm sorry to kind of come in. It's just some of the things that Nsamo spoke about, as well as the question about ecological repair, and just jumping onto Gratia's points made. I think it would be important for me to mention that within Indigenous knowledge, the land is very important to the health of a person. Myself as a traditional healer, in many instances, some of my therapies involve going to the river, to sit with the river, to cleanse in the water of the river. They involve going up to the mountain, connecting with the spirits at the mountain. But it also kind of says something about the different centers in a human. So if I'm with the water, I'm also working with my emotional body. When I'm at the mountain, I'm also working with the higher centers, the forest, etc., etc. And I'm also just looking at a comment or a question by Gaugelo and linking that to the idea of colonization and conquest, the way that the land was taken from Indigenous people, and the fact that there are some practices that we can no longer adequately engage in because we don't have access to the privatized land which hold most of the resources that we need. And so I think in this conversation about health, and I very well taken the point about isolating certain aspects of health, then we forget the fact that the very land that we live on is part of our health, and we are also part of the health of that land. And I would be remiss then not to mention that as part of the interventions for health, there needs to be some kind of social upheaval so that the Indigenous of the various lands have access to that river on a private farm somewhere to be able to feed the ancestor of that river so that the ancestor can also feed me back. So there's something about a bidirectional relationship that happens between the ecology and myself that may be cynical, but it makes me wonder exactly, will we ever reach a holistic kind of health if there's certain kinds of people that don't have access to certain sites in nature because of conquest, because of colonization, and the privatization of land?
Perfect. Thanks, Sinetemba. And I think it does in part also, you're right, answer Gagelo's question. I think there's so many layers to that question. We may have to have a separate webinar on it. Vinod.
Yeah. So I think in the beginning, I said that one of the things which separates between biomedicine and the so-called traditional medicine is this hierarchy. And I think somebody mentioned about colonialism and so forth, that has exacerbated that hierarchy, that biomedicine has become the, one could say that the higher level of medicine, and the others have become the lower level. I think that's the one big problem. At the same time, I think practitioners of traditional systems also suffer to a certain extent the same problem, because they have gone to the extent instead of coming together, they've gone to further separately, because they also think their system of medicine is the best and that is going to solve the problem. That is not the case, actually. No medicine is sufficient for the cure of the patient's problem. I think that must be realized. Now, biomedicine can, of course, take care of. We know that the effect of biomedicine, which includes, quite a lot of preventive actions, vaccines included. Infant mortality rate has been going down since 1980s. We have life expectancy has increased. You know, it used to be just 50 years ago, 60 years ago, it used to be 30. Now it's nearing 70 in most of the countries, you know. Some countries like in Sweden is nearing 80 plus, and maybe closer to 90. So I think biomedicine has also contributed, but at the same time, biomedicine has not solved the problem, because many of the chronic diseases or chronic problems which many of the traditional system has taken care of traditionally, I think they can contribute to the progress of biomedicine. And that's why I think one should work for integration, or one should work for the complementary action of the different kind of medicines, and not in isolation, I would say. I think it was Gracia who took up the question about dance and music. I like that idea very much, you know, and I remember some 10 years ago, I wrote a research application that, because in children who have problem in the school, you know, and there was a study done in Sweden where they had a drumming and dancing as and it showed, it was a randomized controlled trial of the few schools. It showed that children who the schools where the drumming was practiced every morning, you know, and maybe in the evening also, they had a better environment for the school. Children were much more disciplined. They did not have the same problem as before of anxiety and depression and so on. So I think that adds to the health of the children, you know. I think dancing and music, we have done in Karolinska Institute. There is a professor, his name is Torres Turell. His father was a Nobel Prize winner also. He has done many studies showing that music is important for many things, including surgical operations. You know, because if you go in for a surgical operation, if you listen to the music which you have listened earlier, especially the classical music, I think it has a better effect. The anesthesia maybe is taken less. And also the outcome of the operation is positive. So I think we have lots of evidences. And so one thing which I tell the people who are working with yoga, meditation, or with dancing, and so on and so forth, I say that you should not feel inferior in the sense that you don't have the evidence which, like the biomedicine has with the randomized controlled trials and so on. You have the evidence also. And there are many now, yoga and meditation, I can say, there are many diseases where their complementary function is very well proved by using unbiased method also. So I think we need to respect both the allopathy and the traditional system of knowledge creation, and especially in health, I would say. Thank you.
Thanks, Vinod. Yeah, definitely. I think to respect both systems. I think the difference, though, is the power dynamic currently. So because we have an uneven playing field in most parts of the world in terms of power dynamic between these different knowledge systems, even in the way health systems are conceptualized currently, anything that's not biomedical is not included in health systems. So when they speak of access to health care, it would never include traditional healing or indigenous systems, right? And so this is how you can appreciate how the power dynamic is just excluded global majority knowledge. But yeah, we have to work with respect, and we're going to have to work out these ways of doing it. And it's really challenging because we speak such different languages. I'm going to hand it over to Maritza, and that will be the last comment for today. And then we'll be closing.
Okay. Thank you so much. I was just thinking, it is very interesting to hear, to listen to everybody. By my part, fortunately, I grew up in a rural community. When Sine Temba was telling about her work, I was remember my grandmother talking with the river and talking with the spirit of the mountain, trying to provide health to my children, Maritza. That was incredible for me. Then when I was studying in the medical school, to me it was like completely separated world, because it was very scientific, just thinking in the body and in organs, right? Separated organs, which is not right. And then after 20 years working as a physician and neurologist, I always talk to my patient about what about physical health, mental health, environmental, where are you living, who is the people who is surrounding you, and what about your spirit and the spirit of your ancestry and your background, right? This is also health, but you can't take an MRI to look the spirit. You can't take like a radiography to see what happened with your culture, your background, your ancestry. This is difficult to approach, but it is not impossible. But as a physician, I could say that we have to take in mind all these aspects. And now, knowing more my culture, my country, my people, I am deeply convinced that we could do that. But to do that, we, as a physician, another physician needs to know deeply where we are. What about our community? Where I am from, right? We need to explore that knowledge. And then we have to embrace that knowledge and try to incorporate and try to understand the other people in the same way, trying to embrace also their culture, their knowledge, everything. We can separate the body in organs. We can separate our body and the culture and the environment and the fruits, for example, right? I can say, hey, you have to eat that fruit in the jungle, or you have to eat that fruit in the Andes. And in the Andes, they can find that fruit, for example. It is almost mandatory for us to know deeply who is the people, that we are serving and we are working for. As a physician, I could say that.
Thank you, Maritza. Apologies, Anastasia. We're not going to be able to get to your question given the time frame. It was a very interesting question. I'll put it to the panelists and maybe share your email with me, and I'm happy to see if any of the panelists does want to respond. What message will you give to a first-year medical student starting their journey of health knowledge creation within the university system? I would say good luck. I'm sorry, I'm just being funny. But yeah, I think it is challenging, and I think it's about having these conversations, keeping an open mind, and maybe that's the way I'll close, actually. I think a lot of this is about having an open mind from whichever knowledge system you come from. It's about having an open mind and being willing to have a discussion and being willing to also accept points of disagreement as just that, points of disagreement. Not points of we can't find common ground, but sometimes we're just not going to be able to agree on certain concepts, certain terms, certain approaches. And it is really essential for us to keep an open mind and continue these conversations, continue the discussions, find ways of integration or cohesion, synergy, and how we act across our disagreement, for me, becomes so important as we go forward. And that becomes the most important thing. And I think given Maritza's conversation and potentially everyone else, it is honestly a conversation I'm having with this first-year medical student that was me, that in essence was taught so much to reject so much of what we had, and it's in part now trying to address it. So I think, yeah, have the conversations across different knowledge systems within an academic and with beyond the academic environment, and you will find different ways to actually support health, because as Vinod was saying, the most important thing is the patient, the person, and how we actually support better health as a cohesive whole. Thank you to all the panelists today. What a rich and valuable discussion. I think we could talk for hours and hours, and I think I'm going to contact each of you to see how we can actually develop each of what you said separately. Thank you for everyone who actually contributed questions and stayed engaged in this conversation. Our next webinar will be on the 2nd of July, and it will focus on the built environment and brain health. And I hope that you can join us then as well. I will post on my social media platforms and various other platforms, so do follow me there. Thank you all. I will contact all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinod. Thank you,
Thank you.
Maritza. Thank you,
Thank
Sunita
you.
and Gracia.
Bye-bye.